Welcome to Back Porch Tales and Travels, where every journey has a story, every place has a past, and history comes alive through the people who know it best. We're so glad you're with us today.
This episode takes us to one of America's most moving landmarks, the National D-Day Memorial in Bedford, Virginia. It's a place that honors the extraordinary courage, sacrifice, and legacy of the men and women who changed the course of history on June 6, 1944.
Joining us today is Angela Lynch, Director of Communications for the National D-Day Memorial. Angela grew up in Bedford, has spent years sharing the stories of the greatest generation, and brings a unique perspective on why this remarkable memorial was built where it is and why its mission is just as important today as ever.
From the heartbreaking story behind Bedford's connection to D-Day to the incredible symbolism woven into every corner of the memorial, Angela shares fascinating history, behind-the-scenes stories, and powerful reminders of the sacrifices that secured our freedom.
As we sat down with Angela, it quickly became clear that one conversation simply wasn't enough. Today, you'll hear part one as we explore the history of the memorial.
So grab a pint of sweet tea, a little moonshine if you have it, pull up a rocking chair and join us on the back porch as we visit one of our nation's most inspiring memorials.
So I actually grew up in Bedford. I'm a native of Bedford. My late grandfather, was a World War II veteran, did not serve on D-Day, but was a World War II veteran from Bedford County. He didn't really talk about his wartime experience with his children, my mom and my two uncles. It wasn't until my brother and I and my cousin were in grade school, middle school, having to do school projects that we started asking about it. And my mom is feverishly writing down notes behind us to make sure that she's capturing it as well, because a lot of it she was hearing for the first time. Same with my uncles. They were hearing it for the first time probably as adults, a lot of those stories. So it, and you hear that so often with the World War II generation, as they weren't sharing those stories. So a lot of times, I will get the question of growing up in Bedford, this must have been all that you ever heard about. No, it really wasn't. We knew that men had served. I went to school with grandchildren and great nieces and great nephews of men that were living and working in the community and just getting on with their lives who had been there on D-Day or the days that followed. And it really wasn't until the effort was earnestly underway to bring the memorial to Bedford. Well, first of all, just to create the National D-Day Memorial in general, anywhere, and then specifically to bring it to Bedford, that attention really, that spotlight kind of was shown on our hometown. And we started hearing those stories because at that point, those men were out talking about it because they were wanting to get the memorial here in Bedford. Fast forward to mid to late 90s when I'm in graduating high school, going off to college. That was really the time frame that the National D-Day Memorial was being considered, that Bedford was being named the location for the memorial, and that the fundraising and the building were underway. So it was kind of neat seeing that kind of genesis from start to finish in my hometown. So, you're driving down 460, just, going about your daily business, and this, magnificent monument is being built up on the hill behind your elementary school. It's like, there was nothing there a couple of years ago. I was working in TV news during the dedication 25 years ago. And TV news is kind of how I think between that and being from Bedford is what led me to this position. I was very fortunate in 2014 to be able to travel to Normandy with a D-Day veteran from Lynchburg, Bill Sisk, who had landed on Utah Beach. And he came over and said, "Hey, you want to go to France?" And I'm like, "Yeah." And then he was kind of kidding. Well, you don't ask a reporter, you don't invite a girl to France and then tell them you're kidding. And I said, no, but it's because he really didn't like doing a whole lot of media. I think he had a negative experience on a previous trip to France and I believe Belgium. And so he was always good to us locally, but, media wasn't really his thing. And I was fortunate to have a newsroom and a news director and general manager that were like, yes, we should do this because these stories do need to be told. But his daughter was also a history teacher. So she's like, "Hey, Dad, let's do this and let her, capture your story. She can interview you ahead of time. You can tell her whatever you like. And then we're just going to go to France and see how it plays out. So I was very fortunate to be able to get to know Bill through that process, and capture his full story before we even flew over to France. So we did that for the 70th anniversary of D-Day. That was an amazing experience just to be there with Bill, but also to see the reaction of the French people and particularly the school children. We learn about World War II history here. The folks in France, they're the children that are in school now, they're a few generations removed, but their ancestors lived through it. So it kind of has a different feel because it happened there. So it was really interesting to kind of see their reaction to it. So then a few years later, I'm looking to get out of TV news, and the position came open at the memorial to handle marketing and public relations, media relations, everything that kind of falls into that. Obviously had covered a lot of stories with the memorial throughout my years working in the Roanoke-Lynchburg television market. It's just anything they were doing. I was the Bedford beat reporter, which makes sense because I'm from there. So had made, some connections and friendships and networking there. So was approached, hey, are you interested? And of course I was. So that's how I landed here. And they're almost 10 years. It'll be 10 years next year. We started our own podcast. And at first I'm thinking, when I got in this job and there's all these World War II periodicals that you can advertise in, and I'm like, what is left to say? Like, what is left to be told? Boy, was I surprised, because there is so much left to be told and so much research. And, our podcasts were now over 100 episodes, and the majority of those are with authors and historians that are doing independent research, just, finding like a niche area and honing in on it and discovering things that have been sitting in archives for more than 80 years. So there is still so much more to learn and uncover about World War II. It's really incredible. Our podcast is called Someone Talked. So it's a spin off of the World War II propaganda poster. And it's hosted by Dr. John C. McManus, who is a leading World War II historian and has written several books and is just incredible. And that really helped us kind of get going with it, is his notoriety and being in the circles with those authors. He also serves on our board of directors. So we're very fortunate to have someone with that level of expertise here working with us. Yeah, so it's been great. We've been doing that since 2022. Just released our 100th episode. For folks that may be wondering, why is this memorial in Bedford? So the National D-Day Memorial is the nation's monument to D-Day. It is warranted by Congress as the official site of the nation's monument to D-Day. However, what gets sometimes confusing with that is we are not federally funded. We are not a National Park Service site. We are operated by a private foundation with the mission of preserving the lessons and legacies of D-Day and World War II for future generations. The reason why the memorial is located in Bedford, Virginia, and there's a little bit of a backstory here. Our founder, Bob Slaughter, who D-Day veteran, landed on Omaha Beach from Roanoke, Virginia. When he entered his retirement years, he started kind of going out, speaking to school children, telling his personal D-Day story, and, talking with other veterans about it. And they were kind of getting the feeling that the general public, going about our daily lives, didn't really have a firm grasp on what happened on June 6, 1944 and the invasion of Normandy, and the significance and the importance and what they lived through. So Bob and these like-minded veterans kind of got together. I think the original idea came out of a backyard barbecue. It's just, let's sketch it out on a napkin. I don't know if there was an actual napkin involved, but kind of, they're all together and saying, okay, well, what can we do? So kind of came up with, the idea of, let's have a memorial to D-Day somewhere in the United States. I think initially they were looking at maybe something kind of small. They had pitched some concepts to the city of Roanoke to put on Mill Mountain. And the city of Roanoke really wasn't interested in that. I think it was a much larger scale project on that mountain that, it totally would have changed the landscape of the mountain. So when that kind of fell through, the folks in Bedford, Mayor Mike Shelton, Lucille Bogus, who was serving on the Board of Supervisors at the time. And Lucille is, of course, the sister of two Bedford boys who died on D-Day, Bedford and Raymond Hoback. So she's in a leadership position. Mike Shelton is, of course, the mayor. They hear about what's going on in Roanoke and kind of the effort. And they say, well, wait a minute, Bedford's got the story. you guys want to do this, so let's collaborate on this. And the town of Bedford offered attractive land. And then, once the ball kind of got rolling on that, they were able to, I guess, for lack of a better word, pitch it to Congress. And Congress actually declared and warranted the establishment of the National D-Day Memorial in Bedford, Virginia. So named Bedford, Virginia, the site of the National D-Day Memorial, the eventual National D-Day Memorial. And the Bedford's story, talking about, the town leadership stepping forward, the county leadership stepping forward and saying, bring it here. The reason why they decided that Bedford is an appropriate place for the National D-Day Memorial is because Bedford holds the somber distinction of having the highest known per capita loss on D-Day. So the community of Bedford lost 20 men on D-Day, 3 more later in the invasion of Normandy. Out of those 20 men, the first 19 were Company A of the 116th. The 20th man served in Company F and lived kind of in the area of Bedford County that's closer to Roanoke. So not in the same company, but all from the Bedford community, 20 in total, that died on June 6, 1944 in the invasion of Normandy, and then 3 more later during the Normandy campaign. So having that distinction of just your town having the highest known number that died on that day made it a more than appropriate location. And with the leadership starting just down the road in Roanoke, it was really a natural fit. So that's how we came to be in Bedford, Virginia, because a lot of people think, well, why isn't this in Washington or some bigger city or, some other place? And really because we have the connection, we have the story, and a community that was willing to come around and support it. So that being said, the National D-Day Memorial just turned 25 years old. We were dedicated on June 6, 2001 by President George W. Bush, who was here with us for our dedication. And that was, really neat to see because here he is with Bob Slaughter, our founder, at the memorial and just surrounded by other, D-Day survivors, other veterans of the Normandy campaign, flight nurses, World War II veterans. So just really exciting to see him here that day. And I think that put kind of a point on how significant this is. And he gave a wonderful keynote talking. The thing that sticks out in my mind the most is him mentioning that, you've raised a fitting tribute to D-Day and you've put it in just the right place, not a battlefield, but in a small Virginia town. Just kind of, the emblematic American home front, if you will, is what we've kind of marketed Bedford as at this point. This is why it's here, because Bedford's loss is emblematic of the losses all across America, all across the globe with our allies. There were small towns and villages all over the world that sacrificed on this day. So that's why we're here. That's what we do. And our mission, of course, is to preserve the lessons and legacies of D-Day and World War II for future generations. So when you're at the site, it's an absolute beautiful site. One of the things that we hear most often is that people just driving by or they've heard about it, they don't realize the scale, just how large it is, just how grand it is, how well it tells the story. They think, oh, it's a monument to go look at, I'll check out a wall, get back in the car and, and be on with it. And it's really a place that you spend hours exploring. If you go on a guided tour, with one of our guides who are incredible and recommend that to everyone, that's about an hour. But then we always tell people, give yourselves at least another hour after that tour to go back and kind of look at the areas that interest you, because there's a lot to see. The memorial is designed really in 3 distinct portions telling the D-Day story. It starts in an English garden area. The way the garden is laid out, it's in the design of the chafe patch that Eisenhower and his folks wore on their uniforms for the Supreme Headquarters. So representative of that patch in design. It has an English folly with a statue of Eisenhower underneath it, and above him is mosaic tile of the D-Day landing map. So the famous map that everyone sees. If anyone has seen Pressure and you're looking at the map on the wall, that's over Eisenhower's head, in our folly and all in the tile work. So really, kind of a replica of what they were looking at and working with. And then the statue of Eisenhower is flanked by busts of the command staff. So all of the leaders of D-Day that were there in the room with him making those decisions on either side, with narrative plaques, so you can kind of learn about those men and what they were in charge of. So moving on from the English Garden, you step onto our main plaza, Gray Plaza, and you can kind of see it behind me, the blue, a little bit. So when you step onto Gray Plaza, we wanted it to feel as if you were crossing the English Channel. So it's divided in 5 sections to represent all 5 of the landing beaches, and then that, kind of channel blue color. So you're crossing into the channel. On either side of you are the memorial walls. The names of all 4,436 Allied service members who were killed on June 6, 1944, are on either side as you enter that plaza. And then as you approach the other side of the plaza is our beach tableau scene. There is a granite Higgins boat sculpture, so you can kind of, it feels as if you're walking into the landing scene. Sculptures in various positions, landing on the beach, crossing the beach, and then the kind of signature sculpture is scaling the wall, which is, the Pointe de Hoc, soldiers climbing the wall up and over, with water coming out, on either side of them to replicate that. The beach tableau scene also has water effects. It has the hedgehog sculptures, are very authentic to the obstacles that were put out to kind of, wreck our boats on D-Day. And then one thing, that beach scene that is really remarkable is the water effects that are designed to replicate the sound of bullets ricocheting off of the water. And I'll tell kind of a story about that. This is one of my favorite stories that I've ever heard from our architect, Byron Dixon, who I think is incredible, and so talented. He's an architect out of Roanoke, Virginia, who designed the original design elements that I'm telling you about, and put so much thought and detail into symbolism and just, everything from that garden, the patch in the garden, to crossing the channel to the beach scene, bringing on sculptors like Jim Brothers, who was our principal sculptor, who really, kind of understood the assignment and would get really nitty gritty with the detail, borrowing artifacts from people to, make sure that every rope, every shovel, anything that those soldiers were carrying in their backpacks was 100% accurately depicted in his sculptures. But a really interesting story that Byron has shared on a couple of occasions, and the first time I've heard it, I'm like, wow. Sometimes it's better to be lucky than good, I suppose. But when they were installing the water effects there on the beach scene, I believe he told me it was like a crew out of Florida that was coming up and basically programming this. There's some software and hardware and things in our bunker that make that happen. And so Byron is, standing out on the plaza. I think he has a veteran with him, and they're just kind of, one of the guys that was on the leadership team, and they're just kind of looking at it. And he said originally the idea was we have these water effects and it's just going to come up in a plume and go back down, come up in a plume, very much like a water fountain, right? And so they're standing there looking at it, discussing something, and the crew's up from Florida doing the install. And all of a sudden they start hearing pop, 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 just, random all across the water. And they're looking at each other. And the gentleman who's with them is like, that's it. That's what it needs to sound like. Like, this is what it sounded like. And one of the members of the install team comes running out of the bunker, apologizing profusely. Like, I'm so sorry. That won't happen again. I was pressing some buttons. I didn't know what I was doing. And they're like, actually, can you make that happen again? So then he had to go figure out, okay, how did I press those buttons to program that to make it happen? And that is one of the things that we hear about so often with the water effects, is the accuracy. And then, it's so quiet when you walk on that plaza and you're approaching the channel. And then as you get closer to the beach scene, the water effect sounds are louder and louder, and, really kind of replicating as best that we can what it was like that day. So that's an area that I think you have to see it to really understand it. we're very careful to let people know, hey, we do have these water effects, because we have even modern day veterans, children, there are people that have all sorts of sensory issues going on. And we let people know, hey, we have these water effects. So if that is something that maybe you don't want to be a part of, let's figure that out. We can turn them off if we have a special tour. We've done like sensory friendly days and that sort of thing. So if there are individuals that are struggling with PTSD or whatever the case may be, we want them to enjoy the site. But from the perspective of, I don't think there will ever be a sound outside of war that will be 100% what they heard that day. But for storytelling purposes in an artistic depiction, I think it's about as close as you will get. And we had, even from the very beginning, right there that day when the happy accident created something that was real and authentic to that veteran that was standing there with Byron, that I think that's one of the things that we've heard most often from the guys who were there is, yes, like you got it right. Like the depiction of even, the sculptures crossing the beach, what it sounded like, what it felt like this is, if you're looking for an artistic depiction, this is about as close to the story as you will find. So, I mean, that's the ultimate compliment, right? For someone who was there to say, yeah, you got it right. You're telling the story correctly. So that has always been incredible to hear. And we would get that a lot throughout the years. I'll kind of move on from the beach scene to tell you about the last kind of major area of the memorial, and that's up, you can see behind me, the arch area. So the Overlord Arch, this is the Victory and Beyond section of the memorial. What's really cool about the arch is there's a lot of symbolism baked into it. So the top of it is designed to kind of look like the gables of the houses in the villages in France, which lots of veterans pick up on that right away. Like, oh, that looks like, what we saw when we were kind of working our way through these villages. Of course, the stripe design, the white and the invasion stripe. So that the white and black alternating stripe pattern is what was painted on the Allied aircraft that day, so that the people that were there on the ground would know, don't shoot at that plane. That's, one of the planes taking part in the invasion, and they're here to help us. So the invasion stripes are a big symbolic thing with D-Day. The arch itself is known as the Overlord Arch because emblazoned in gold is Overlord, which was the code name for D-Day. And the arch itself stands 44 feet 6 inches tall, which Byron tells me was not intentional. It's just kind of the way it worked out. And somebody had asked him one day, like, how tall is the arch? And he's like 44'6". And they're like, you're kidding. And he's like, why? Is that a problem? And they're like, Byron, 6'6", 44. So he told that story on our podcast recently. And I'm like, come on, no, you planned that. And he's like, no, actually, it's just, it's the way it worked out. So another kind of little symbolic thing there. So, and then on either side of the arch are the flags of the 12 Allied nations, and they're telling about each of those Allied nations and their role on D-Day. So those are kind of the main three areas of the memorial that you would see on tour. And then there are so many other elements that are kind of even beyond that. We have a Veterans Brick Walk, Centennial Parade that is kind of the beyond D-Day section. So once you get past Victory, kind of telling, the world picture, what was happening in America beyond D-Day. We have a sculpture that's a recasting in that parade of the Lady of Trevier, which is a sculpture in France that was damaged, and they left it up. It was outside this church in France, in Trevier, France. And when our team from Bedford went over to France, kind of in the early days, the planning stages of the memorial, they see the sculpture, and the damage was left on the sculpture to basically show this is what war looks like, that it's not pretty, and, this is kind of the lasting impact. And, I've got to hand it to Byron and to, I think, I'm not sure if Mike Shelton was one of the people doing the asking. Jim Brothers, our principal sculptor, was there, but they asked the town, can we have this sculpture? And they're like, no, but we'll make you one. We were very fortunate. They said, no, you can't have ours, but we will make one as a gift to the memorial. Yeah, so that's how our Lady of Trevier, we'll call her Trevier 2, came to be. And that, that's just a really nice touch at the memorial. Some of the kind of other things flanking the sides, we are home to Virginia's first Gold Star Families Memorial Monument, which was an effort by the late Woody Williams, who was the final Medal of Honor recipient from World War II, lived in West Virginia, was a great friend of the memorial. Actually, right after I started working at the memorial, I came on board, I think, in March, and that following May, Memorial Day, is when Woody was with us to dedicate that monument. And what's kind of neat and special about ours is not only is it the first one in Virginia, he had set out to put one of these in every state, and I think they've accomplished that, but we're very proud to have the first one in Virginia. But typically the imagery on the one side, it says Gold Star Family's Memorial Monument. It has the cutout of the soldier and the way the sun hits it. It has a shadow on the ground, and it's just very symbolic and touching. And on the other side of it, there are typically images of Iwo Jima, and they all look the same. Woody gave us special permission to use imagery of Bedford as home front, the Bedford boys, imagery of the D-Day landing. So it's very special and unique to our particular story, and takes nothing away from, the other monuments. But it's one of those things people might think, oh, I've seen one, I've seen them all. Well, you haven't seen ours. It's very different. And we were very fortunate, of course, Woody's like, yes, he loved the idea. And behind that monument, we've actually created a Medal of Honor garden, and, we dedicated a plaque just this past Memorial Day with Drew Dick. I'm sorry, not Memorial Day, June 6th. Drew Dick was our 25th anniversary keynote speaker, and he, of course, is a Medal of Honor recipient from Vietnam. So that was really cool to have him there with us to dedicate the Medal of Honor plaque that is just telling the overall story. What is the Medal of Honor, but also kind of in tribute to the 4 Medal of Honor recipients from D-Day. We have another plaque that we've already dedicated to Jimmy Monteith, who was one of the Medal of Honor recipients from D-Day, and of course a Virginian, member of the Virginia Tech Corps of Cadets. So that's a really special kind of local connection there. And we will be dedicating plaques to the other recipients from D-Day and, of course, to Woody.
Wow. I really want to go visit that memorial after listening to Angela talk about it and seeing those amazing videos and pictures.
Well, one of the things that just grabs you is just how organic this memorial is. The idea for it and the creation of it came from local World War II veterans there in the Bedford area. And even today, it is a national memorial, but it's not a national park. So it's still run and operated by local people, local donations, ticket sales, and just makes it still small town USA. And why it's in Bedford is exactly that, is what small towns sacrificed for our freedom in World War II and D-Day in particular. And then, of course, the Bedford story. If you don't know the Bedford boys story, tells it all.
Yeah, I agree. I think that it carries an added significance versus, like, I recently visited the National World War II Museum in New Orleans, which is stunning. And I hope that we get to interview someone from that museum. And I loved it. But there's just something so heartfelt about the story behind the creation of this. And I'm sure there's a heartfelt story behind that museum too.
Yes.
We just don't know it yet. But what amazes me, I have to say, is the grandeur of it. Before we interviewed Angela and received all the pictures and footage that she sent us, I did not envision something as grand and expansive. Just the arch and the tableau with the water, and what a miraculous story. I love that too. If you ever go visit and you stand there and you listen to the water popping up, and just to know that was God that made that happen, because they're like, that's it. They didn't even mean to do it. It just, wow.
Well, and if you believe in something being predestined, that memorial is almost like it was, first of all, destined to happen, and also destined to be in Bedford. When they first got together, they tried to put in Roanoke, which is a much bigger city. Bedford's still a small town, but it's in the place it's supposed to be. And of course, the setting in the Blue Ridge Mountains of Virginia, you can see that in the pictures and the background stuff is just beautiful. And like Angela talked about, this is the beauty that those boys grew up with, and they left to go fight on the shores of France. So
I think there's a juxtaposition between how grand it is. Sitting in the small town, but it works with nature. It works with it's very soothing, the circular structure of it. I love that. It's amazing.
And another thing, talking about destiny, even some of the small details, she talks about the height of the arch and how by accident, it was June,
Yeah.
6/6/44. And then also the details in so much of it and just lined up perfectly.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
moving and stuff.
I think there's an extra sense of awe that you get from knowing that. And I'm sure that they talk about that when you take the tours. So I guess there's a little plug to put in when you go visit, definitely get a tour. Don't just walk through it alone because otherwise you might not understand just the miracle that you're looking at.
Well, if you enjoyed today's episode, you're not going to want to miss what's coming up next. Part 2 is filled with powerful stories, remarkable artifacts, and a deeper appreciation for the men and women whose courage changed the course of history. As we continue our conversation with Angela, it became clear there were too many incredible stories to fit in a single episode.
In part 2, Angela takes us even deeper into the memorial's collection, sharing the powerful story of Raymond Hoback's Bible, the significance of the memorial's newly acquired authentic Higgins boat, the mystery behind the gold wedding band featured in one of the sculptures, and the extraordinary research project to identify every Allied service member who lost their life on D-Day. She also offers helpful tips for anyone planning a visit to this unforgettable place.
And thanks for joining us on Back Porch Tales and Travels. We'll see you next time for part 2 of our special conversation with Angela Lynch from the National D-Day Memorial.